And here we are, Second Peter, and I want us to just look at this for a minute here. We already covered Hebrews, James, and First Peter, and now we're in Second Peter, and we did the first chapter, the introduction of the first chapter. Now, what do you remember about Hebrews? Just to summarize, this is what Hebrews was about. Superiority of the Son, new high priest, change of the law. And that's just a really brief of the book of Hebrews. Hopefully that you're connected and remember that. James, of course, you know, the trials in chapter 1 just laid the whole book out. It's through the chapters 3, 4, and 5, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It was already in chapter 1. And then beware, what are you to beware of? There was 2 things. Wisdom, there was kind of 2 things on that. Pride, there was 3 things with the pride. And then patience. And hopefully you remember those things. And then First Peter, how we were made holy, holy people and their walk and conduct. And of course, chapter 5 was dealing with the shepherds and the flock. And now here in 2 Peter, in chapter 1, we dealt with, just to summarize this a little bit, verse 2, step to a personal relationship with the Father and Son. Verses 6 through 8, developing a walk with the Father and Son, which is going to really help our spiritual walk in doing these things. These are extremely important that we really follow what was laid out there in verses 6 through 8. Verse 10, make your calling sure. And I think that's a problem that many believers are not doing. We need to make our calling sure. We examine ourselves and see, am I really in the faith or not? This is extremely important. And then we see in 12 through 15, written to be a reminder after Peter's death. So, and then of course he ends it up with the scriptures are from God. Now, these are not made up. The prophets didn't make up what they wrote. Everything came from God. So we have that laid out. So now we're going to chapter 2. Now, chapter 2, I put up there at the top John 10, 12 to 13, which is the hirelings, which kind of fits into this. Isaiah 56, verses 10 through 12, the watchman shepherds, and what Isaiah says about them. Ezekiel chapter 34. The shepherds that feed themselves. See, these are your false prophets, your false teachers. This is what they're referring to. And now Peter is going in and doing the same. He's referring to these false teachers. And so we're starting to get into that. Now, breaking it up, verses 1 through 3, the destructive doctrines. And we'll get into that a little bit. Then verses 4 through 11 is the doom of the false prophets. They will be accountable. And this is important because you could compare this to 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. Because what he's kind of doing here is the same thing that Paul was doing in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. Because the Thessalonian church was going through such persecution that he was giving them a comfort that the people that were doing this were going to be held accountable for what they were doing. So Peter's kind of given us this same idea, showing us. And then verses 12 through 17 is moral corruption of the false teachers. What the damage they do. It's bad. And then 18 through 22, the deceptions of false teachers. In other words, they're testing to see who are really the saints. And that's why the Lord's allowing them to do the work that they're doing. Because because God always tests his people. You've seen that throughout the Old Testament, what he does? He tests them. Not so he will know, but so they will know. See, we need to know, am I really one of the Lord's? Or do I just think I am? And see, the test will tell. When those who endure the test will endure all the way to the end. If you don't endure all the way to the end, what's that tell you? you're really not one of his. That's the whole idea. And you think back about Genesis chapter 24, and I don't want to get into all that, but you see there that the servant was sent to get the bride for Isaac. And she had to make a choice, but once she made her choice, she took and made that trip going all the way back to the land where Isaac was. Now, she could have turned around at any point and went back home, go back home, but she endured all the way to the end until she met up with him. You see, that's the key. Are we doing that? Are we there? Do we really want to see Jesus? See, okay, let's get into verses 1 through 3. Verse 1. But there were also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them, and bringing on themselves swift destructions. Now this is verses 4 through 17, is verse 1. Verse 2, and many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of the truth will be blasphemed. That's verses 18 through 22. And then by covetousness they will exploit you with deceptive words. For a long time their judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. That's verses 4 through 22, which is putting them all together there. So we have pretty much the layout of the chapter right here in the first 3 verses, because we're going to start looking at those. As we get into verse 4, we're going to see what he's talking about in verse 1. There will be false prophets among you, there were false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you. So we'll start looking at these verses real quick. But there were also false prophets among people, even as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. So this is 4 through 7. In other words, he's focusing. Remember this chapter, the first 17 verses is focusing on the false teachers. And verses 18 through 22 is those whom they get, and how they're going to bring those who claim to be believers. They're going to get them. So that's what he's going to say. So we see there secretly. Secretly is to introduce or bring in secretly or deceitfully. So they're going to slide in. So in other words, and when you think of that, I don't know how many. I don't know if I know I said this, but I can't remember if I said it in class or not. Who all remembers Jim Jones? What happened there? The story there. How he got so many people, and they just thought that he was it, and look what happened there. So this is what false teachers do. They slide right in. They seem like they're the best thing, that's been around for who knows how long. And then what the destruction that they're going to do, because they bring in destructive heresies. So, and they even denying the Lord who bought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. In other words, they don't come in immediately denying the Lord. See, they wait until they're in, and then they start moving you and working you away from the Lord. So the word there, the G648 for destructive, means destroying, utter destruction, ruin. The destruction which consists of eternal misery. That's what they're going to lead you to. That's where they're going, and they're going to lead you right with them. That's what they're going to be doing. And heresies, the word means a choice. That is specifically a party or an abstract, disunion, act of taking, capture, a body of men following their own doctrines, which is a sect or a party, like the Pharisees, the Sadducees. You can see that there was many. That's what they do. So this can all slide, and you can see the comparison, what's going on with the church in these kind of ideas. What when you get into conversation, why is there so many different denominations? Well, this kind of tells you how that comes about. All right. And the BBE translates it, but there were false prophets among the people, as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly put forward wrong teachings for your destruction, even turning away from the Lord, who gave himself for them, whose destruction will come quickly, and they themselves will be the cause of it. In other words, they're bringing it upon themselves. And anyone that follows them, when they follow these false teachers, what are they doing? They've done it to themselves. Because you're not going to follow them unless they're doing something that's attracting you to follow. And they're going to, and here's how the enemy works. This is so simple. Whenever they're teaching, and it caters to the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, or the pride of life, there you go. That's a big indicator right there. Big indicator. Because when it's the worldly things that they're, for the things that's now in this world, they cater to those things. This doesn't fit the scriptures. This is not what Jesus taught. And verse 2 says, and many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth will be blasphemed. That's verses 18 through 22 that we'll be looking at. That's what they're going to be doing. ERV puts, many people will follow them in the morally wrong things they do. Many people follow them in the morally wrong things they do. And because of them, others will say bad things about the way of the truth we follow. And if we don't think this is happening right now, it most certainly is. And it's getting worse, much worse. And then verse 3 says, by covetousness, they will exploit you with deceptive words. For a long time, their judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber. So covetousness is greedy, desires to have more. You can't have enough. You want more and more. Covet, and of course that's the 10th commandment. Thou shalt not covet. So you see that. See, that's what they're going to cater to. Covetousness. If we are a covetous people, they will attract us. They will be able to start pulling you in, because that's the key. They know the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life, covetousness. They'll pull you right in. They will exploit you. That is, make merchandise of you, to use a person or a thing for gain. That's all they're using you for. That's all they're using you for. And for a long time, their judgment has not been idle. In other words, it's not idle. The judgment that rests upon them is not idle. We just don't see it happening, what God's doing. They're going to face, and he's going to start giving the illustrations. And there's 3 illustrations that he's going to give to us to let us know that these guys are not getting away with this, and he's going to give us 3 illustrations on that. So the remedy puts it, in their eagerness for power, fame, and wealth, these false teachers will mislead you with theories and doctrines they have made up on their own. Because of this, their terminal condition only worsens, and their ultimate destruction is unavoidable. There's no way they can avoid it. When they do that, when they've gone this far and done this, it's unavoidable. It's coming. Okay. Now verses 4 through 11. So this picks up right from verse 3. It's continuing on. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, there's number 1. See, the 3 things, this is number 1. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. Verse 5. And did not spare the ancient world, that's number 2, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly. Number 3, verse 6, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemning them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly. Now, those are the 3 examples to let us know that they're not getting away with this. Nobody's getting away with what they've done. You do evil, God, and then we'll see here as we go on, God reacts when certain things happen. That's when he reacts. When it goes so far, then he reacts, and he's going to do something. So, and then verse 7 it says, and delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. For that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. The Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of the temptation and to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment. That's important. To reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment. That's interesting. And especially those who walk according to the flesh in the lust of uncleanness, despise authority. They are presumptuous, self-willed. They are not afraid to speak evil of dignitaries, whereas angels who are greater in power and might do not bring a reveling accusation against them before the Lord. So these verses here we want to look at and try to take our time at. Now, verse 4, we'll take a little bit more time with that, but you see the connections here. And that's why I put them in red. We see the connections there, that he did not spare the angels who sinned. He did not spare the ancient world. Why? What happened? What happened to make these things happen? And then Sodom and Gomorrah, he destroyed them. And that became what? An example to those who will live ungodly. There's a point. There's a point. You go so far, God will react when that happens. And then we see they reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment. So where's those fallen angels, those ones that he's talking about, where are they at right now? Where are those people in Noah's day that died? Where are they at right now? And those in Sodom and Gomorrah that were destroyed, where are they at? You see, they are reserved under punishment for the day of judgment. That's where they're at. So we'll begin to look at this. Now, we're looking at verse 4. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. Now, there's a couple ways of looking at this. Some already have their ideas on what they think that this is referring to. It could be either one. It could be either one. I'm just going to briefly touch on them, but I'm not going to go too deep into them, but I'm just going to briefly give the idea. So, first off, to look at this, but he cast them down to hell. Now, this is important. Is it real? This is important. Is it real or is it not real? We have to come to a conclusion on that. Either I believe that it is real, because this word only appears one time in the Bible. It's the only time. Peter's the only one that uses it. And that means the deepest depth or the abyss of Hades. That's what the word means. So the deepest depth or abyss is of Hades. So first off, does Hades exist? Or is it not real? It's just a made up place to give a story. These are things that we have to be able to come across and realize, either I believe Hades exists or I don't. And there are those that don't. There's a lot of people that do not believe that Hades exists, that it exists. So that's important to learn that. So if these angels refer to all fallen angels. That includes Satan. Satan would be one of them. How would one interpret this? How would you interpret this? So we have to look at those things. Jude tells us in Jude 1:6, and the angels which kept not their first estate, what's that? Their beginning place. The first estate is their beginning place of their rank, where their ranks were. But left their own habitation. Where was that? Heaven. That's their dwelling place, residence, was heaven. They left it. They're not there anymore. They left it. He has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness until the judgment of the great day. So, the idea is this word, if I could pronounce it properly, Tartaro, which means the deepest part of Hades, does that mean darkness? It's because that's the interpretation some will take, that this refers to darkness, that they're chained under darkness because of what Jude says. They're saying that they're reserved in everlasting chains into darkness, so they're trapped in darkness. So once they've turned from the Lord, they're trapped from darkness. So remember, this here, we're given this for an illustration for the false teachers. This has to do with, the context is dealing with the false teachers. He's given examples on that. So think about that. So if this deepest part of Hades is not a real place, but like a metaphor, not real, for a condition, meaning darkness, this means all fallen angels are chained, bound in darkness, and are free to influence humans to do evil. That's what that means. Because we know that Satan's still operating. We know that fallen angels are still operating. The demons are still operating. So, are they just chained in darkness now to where they just can't get out of being in darkness? Because they're going to be in darkness forever. It's only under God's permission, of course, that they can only do things under God's permission. These are things to think about. So keeping in the context, what does this indicate for the false teachers and those that follow them? So what would that mean? Well, that means they've turned back their backs on God, and now they are in chains of darkness. So they're just in chains of darkness. That's one viewpoint. And then there's another viewpoint on it as well. You can go with whichever one you want. So here again, for if God did not spare the angels, so the angels, all fallen angels or just certain ones, like in Genesis 6. Is that what he's referring? Because, and this connects with whether the word hell there is existing or not, whether it really is a true place or not. And of course, what we already read in Jude 1:6, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, which is heaven, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness until the judgment of the great day. So here again, the deepest depth of Hades, that is less freedom than Hades has. If it's a real place, then it's the lower part of Hades. Now we know in Luke chapter 16, we learn about the rich man who's in Hades. What freedom does the rich man in Hades have? What connection does he have with the people on the earth? None. He has no connection. If he had connection, he wouldn't ask Abraham to send Lazarus to his family, because he could go himself. If he was free to do that, he could have got out and went and told him himself to try to get to him. But he was confined. He was trapped. He could not get out. So when do those who are in Hades get out? When do they get out of Hades? At the Great White Throne Judgment. In Revelation chapter 20. That's when they come out. They come out and they go to the Great White Throne Judgment. That's when they come out. But they don't come out of that until the great white throne judgment. So when people die without Christ, they go to Hades. And that's where they'll be until the judgment. Now, what we learn from in Luke is that's not a good place to be. Because the rich man he's what? He's tormented in a flame. And he thinks he's still in his body, but he's not. He's thirsty. He's in a place of torment. If the place is real, that man still there, still today, right now. He's still there. And there's millions that are in there, still today, waiting for the judgment. The TPE translates, now don't forget, God had no pity for the angels when they sinned, but threw them into the lowest, darkest dungeon of gloom and locked them in chains where they are firmly held until the judgment of torment. So they are held in a place until the judgment, which is the great white throne judgment. They're not going to get out. They're stuck in there. That's what this translation is telling us. Now, so if we take it as a literal place, it's not a place in heaven and it's not a place on earth. So it's the deepest abyss or the depths of Hades to incarcerate an eternal torment, to thrust down to Tartaro, to hold captive in the deepest Hades. I'll put it that way. The ISV translates, for if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but threw them down into the lowest hell and imprisoned them in the chains of deepest darkness. So we notice there's two things. There's two things there. But they threw them into the lowest hell and imprisoned them in chains of darkness, deepest darkness, holding them for judgment. So there's two things. You're thrown into that, and then there's the darkness, the chains of darkness that is brought on. The EMTV puts it, for if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but rather confined them to the lower part of Hades and delivered them into the chains of darkness reserved for judgment. So we look at that, and then we see also in Revelation chapter 9, and we also in chapter 9 where the pit, where the angel comes down and unlocks the pit, and there's so many come out of the pit. Why are they're trapped in a pit? How? So they had to be let loose to come out of there, these locusts. But in Revelation 9:13 it says, and the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. So we see that there's four angels that are bound. Well, what does that mean? You take that however you want to. Well, we know that there's four of them. They're bound in the river Euphrates. We also have in Revelation chapter 12, verse 7, and there was war in heaven. Wait a minute. How can war happen in heaven? How can that be? If all the fallen angels, if it's all of them, they can't get to heaven. So, and there was war in heaven. Now remember, Jude 1:6, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, which is heaven. He was reserved. So how they can't? These guys are not. Whoever went to the lower part of Hades, they're not there to fight because they can't get there. So, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought with his angels. And he prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Meaning what? Where have they been dwelling at? In heaven. They've been dwelling in heaven. But then they're cast out of heaven. So obviously heaven is not the lowest part of Hades. So this kind of supports the idea these were certain angels that this happened to. For whatever they did, they crossed the line and God reacted and threw them into the lowest part of Hades. He put them there. Now, are they going to be there until the great white throne judgment? Probably so. They're not coming out until then. So they're not doing anything unless it's where the, which is also in Revelation 9, where the pit was opened and all the locusts come out, unless they are part of that. So then we have the word chains also. And it only appears one time. This word only appears one time, which means to fasten, a chain, a binding or drawing, a chain. That's what the word means. So it's a binding, something that bounds you, holds you fast. Of darkness and reserved. Now we have this reserved that it comes in 1 Peter 4 times. And it means to detain in custody, figuratively to maintain, withhold for personal ends, hold fast, keep, watch. So it means to detain, withhold, hold fast, keep, and watch. So they're being watched. So we have that in verse 4, 9, 17, and in chapter 3, verse 7. So here we have it in verse 4, for if God did not spare the angels of sin, but cast them down to hell, and deliver them into the chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. So they're in a place of reservement. Now, is that they're in hell, but they're also reserved. And then verse 9 says, the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptation and to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment, which would fit what's going on in Hades. When lost people go, they're in torment until the day of judgment. Then it's going to be far worse. So whatever they're going through, it's going to be far worse. And then chapter 2, verse 17, these are wells without water, clouds carried by a tempest, for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. And then chapter 3, verse 7, but the heavens and the earth which are now preserved by the same word, are reserved for fire until the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. So you can look at this however you want to look at it. If you want to think that all Satan and all of them are chained in darkness, and that the lower place in Hades is just an unreal place, it's like a metaphor, that's fine. Now we go to verse 5, the second thing. And we'll go much faster now than we did on that. So we see here, verse 5, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly. Now we know in the line, Noah is the 10th person, so he's not the 8th person. The 8th person was Methuselah, so which was Noah's grandfather. Was Methuselah would have been the 8th person. So I think that the New King James has the right translation here, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, not the 8th person. I think there's some translations say that he was the 8th person, but he was one of 8. Bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly. So what happened? Why did the flood come? What were the people doing? Just like, what did those angels do that caused those ones to be cast? God reacted, and he did something with them, And you don't think that if it was just a few or whatever comparison, I guess, a few compared to millions or billions, it may have been millions that they're throwing in there too, but the idea that all the other angels saw this and the chances of them doing that, they knew what would happen if they would do, if they would go that far. Don't cross the line. There's a line that you cross. And when you cross that line, you've crossed it. There's no return. Not that angels could return, but people, they can put themselves in those positions. And Williams translates, for if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others with him, he brought the flood upon the world of the godless people. So ungodly people are going to face, these people faced the flood, and where are they at now? They are reserved for judgment. They're not out in the world. They're not going out and trying to reach people and tell them, hey, don't come here, you know, like the rich man. They're not doing that. They're confined. And we already know, because we know that God laid an example down. So we have, this is our second example that is given to us, that we know that you cross this line, not only will it cost you physically, but it's going to cost you eternally as well. It's a huge thing to take this into account. And in verse 6, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterwards would live ungodly. Of course, this is Genesis 19. So here's 3 times there's a warning. But in all 3 of them, God reacts. Nobody gets away with what they've done. This is important. So this is kind of like a comfort in a way, but at the same time it's sad. Because these people, we would hope that they would repent and come out of that and turn to the Lord. But once they crossed the line, and we already had that illustration has already been given to us in the Old Testament. Remember, Israel came out of Egypt, went into the wilderness. And what happened? They were exposed to all this light that God has given them. They go into the wilderness, and what do? They turn against God. And God said, which we've seen that in Hebrews, they will not enter my rest. So where are they going? Not into God's rest. They're not going to be with God. Even though they got all this enlightenment, seen all this enlightenment. This is important. We really start to grasp these things. The ERV puts verse 6 as, God also punished the evil cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. He burned them until there was nothing left but ashes. He used those cities as an example of what will happen to people who are against God. So you want to stay against God? Well, what's going on today? We know what's starting to happen today. Now, the world calls it global warming. But it's godly warning. God's warning. But people don't want to hear what God has to say. They don't want to turn to God. So they just look, it's global warming. So they think, well, it's because of the gases and that's getting in the air. We need to do with fossil fuels. We need to do away with that so we can save our planet. No. God can fix the planet if we turn to him. He can fix the planet. That's not a big deal for him. We can't we can't stop God from what he's doing. So this indicates that there are points when sin is so great, God reacts to it. And that's what we just saw in those. The angels, the flood of Noah, and Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's what we just saw there. The angels that crossed the line, which is probably those in Genesis 6, which fits. The sins of the people before the flood, what happened? They crossed the line. The evil got so bad they crossed the line. And of course, the sins of the people in Sodom and Gomorrah, they crossed the line, just like those did during the flood. So, and we also see in Genesis 15:16, but in the fourth generation they shall come here again, that is, the children of Israel will come back into the land, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. You see, God's foreknowledge, he knows that the Amorites, their sin is going to come to the full, and God's going to react. He's going to do something about it. See, so to keep those things in mind. So the whole idea here is the false teachers, what's going to happen to them, and he gives us the 3 examples. This is what's going to happen. If we want to follow what they're doing, the same thing. We're going to get the same thing they get if we follow that path. That's what we're going to get. Verse 7. And delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. Now, this word appears 2 times. The oppressed, which is vexed. I think the King James puts vexed. And this word appears 2 times in the King James Version. One it's translated oppressed, but also the New King James translated oppressed, which is in Acts 7:24. And then Peter, it's usually translated vexed in this verse here. And it means to tire down with toil, exhaust with labor, to afflict or oppress with evils, to make trouble for, to treat roughly. So we realize that Lot, he was there, he was a light to the people, that God had him there, and he was being a light to these people. They didn't like it. And so he's seen this evil and the filthy conduct of the people day after day after day. When we see Williams translating, save the upright Lot, who was constantly distressed by the immoral conduct of lawless men. In verse 8, for that righteous man dwelt among them, tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. Aren't we doing the same thing? Isn't that happening today? Of course, it was far worse then than it is now. We're not far from it, though. We're not too far from it. Williams translates, for as long as that upright man was living among them, his upright soul, day and night, was always being tortured by what he saw and heard in their lawless actions. You know, and when we look at that, and I see what Paul wrote in Romans 8, verses 22 and 23, he says, and we know that the whole creation groans and travels in pain together until now. And not only so, but ourselves also, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption and redemption of our bodies. You see, we, like Lot, are seeing this, and it does. It has an effect upon us. And we hate to see the evil. It's not the people. We don't hate the people. We hate the evil. And we're to be a light and a testimony to the lost to help bring them to Christ. That's what we're trying to do here. I want to get to verse 11. I know my time's just about up. The Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptation and to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment. The Lord is able to keep the upright safe in this time of testing. So whenever our testing comes, he knows how to keep us safe and to keep evildoers under punishment until the day of judgment. He knows how to put them. That's why they're in Hades, the lower part of Hades. The angels are, and the fallen men or the ungodly men are in Hades until the day of judgment. And remember 1 Corinthians 10:13. And this is the BBE translation. But you have been put to no test but such as is common to man. And God is true, who will not let any test come on you which you are not able to undergo. But he will make the test a way out of it. He will make a way out for you so that you may be able to go through it. He enables us to go through it. He's the one. We probably can't make it through it on ourselves, but he can get us through it. Verse 10, he says, especially those who walk according to the flesh and the lust of uncleanness and despise authority. They despise authority. They are presumptuous, that is, argumentative, disrespectful, overconfident, self-willed. They are not afraid to speak evil of dignitaries, which is those, let me put this, TLV puts it, especially those who follow after the flesh and its unclean desires and who despise the Lord's authority, brazen and arrogant. These people do not tremble while slandering glorious beings. In other words, heavenly beings and so forth. I give an illustration here on that as well after I go through this. Verse 11, whereas angels who are greater in power and might do not bring a raveling accusation against them before the Lord. Whereas angels who are far superior in strength and power to these beings bring no abusive accusation against them before the Lord. In Jude, we have this, and then we'll close. It says, Jude 1:8, likewise also these dreamers defile the flesh, reject authority, and speak evil of dignitaries. Yet Michael, the archangel, in contending with the devil when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a raveling, that is, an insulting accusation, but said, the Lord rebuke you. But these speak evil of what things they do not know, and whatever they know naturally, but brute beasts, and in these things they corrupt themselves. Woe to them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, have run greedily in the error of Balaam for profit, and perish in the rebellion of Korah. So you see the idea there? Go in the way of Cain. What are they going to do? Balaam for profit. And what's going to end? They're going to perish in the rebellion of Korah. So we see a process, and we'll get that when we get to Jude. Okay, so we went through we have the verses 1 through 3. There were false prophets, there will be false teachers among us. The way of truth will be evil spoken of. The false teachers, in their eagerness for power, fame, and wealth, they will mislead you. Verses 4 through 11, example, if God did not spare the angels that had fallen. Verses 5 through 8, or God did not spare in the day of the flood, or Sodom in Lot's day. Those are our three examples. God knows how to deliver the godly. And so we'll pick up in verses 12 next time.